The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone. We hope everyone has had a pretty good week. We got hit with a little snowstorm, and we're expecting more snow this week, but based on where we live, we pretty much have to expect it this time of year.
Yeah, it's been pretty cold out, and the cold weather kind of got me in the mood for this week's episode.
Well, before you get started, I'd just like to remind everyone that if they haven't yet, we'd love to see more reviews of our show. So if you have a moment, if you'd all be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on whatever app you use to listen to us, it would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and we should also mention that we greatly appreciate all of you that follow us on Facebook. You know, we have some fellow wanderers who take the time to like just about every single post that we put out. And we just want you to know that we do notice and we do appreciate it.
Yes, we do. So let's get back to whatever this wintry tale is that you're going to tell us. Is it a creepy one?
Well, I think you will most certainly find it pretty creepy.
Okay.
The gaunt 15-foot creature stalks the small snowbound village. Its pale gray skin is bared to the frigid cold as it stealthily makes its way from one house to the next, peering into the frosted-over windows, its glowing eyes searching in vain for what it seeks. Opening its bloodied mouth, revealing its long, razor-sharp fangs, its long tongue comes snaking out, searching for what it craves above all other things, human flesh. Unable to enter house after house, the creature lets out an anguished shriek before finally coming upon a lone traveler making his way through the high snowdrifts in the night. The creature takes its prey, devouring the human helpless against its attacks. The lonesome creature's gaunt appearance has thickened slightly, newly sustained by its meal. But soon that hunger returns. The one man was not enough, and the Wendigo wanders off, ready to stalk another village.
Oh, boy. The first time I ever heard about the Wendigo was back in college because my Gothic literature professor had published a really, really good novel called Winter Hunger that was about a family that moved to northern Canada, and there was a Wendigo in it. And when I was reading it, there was always that question of, is this all psychological in the main character's head, or is there really something supernatural going on? It's probably the scariest book I've ever read. And actually, you can still buy it online. So if anyone is interested, it's called Winter Hunger by Anne Tracy.
That's really the question surrounding the Wendigo. Is it a supernatural beast or a form of psychosis? So it's interesting that you thought that.
Well, either way, the whole Wendigo thing really creeps me out.
The Wendigo is a pretty nasty creature from the Algonquin Native Americans and First Nation cultures and folklore in the United States and Canada. Legends of the Wendigo, or Wendigo, it has a lot of different names depending on the cultures describing it. The legends stretch back hundreds of years before the first European settlers arrived in North America. But the earliest known written account by a European is from a Jesuit missionary named Paul Lejeune, who wrote about an encounter back in 1636 in what is now Quebec. He was staying with the Algonquin people and wrote that a devilish woman had told him about a werewolf-like creature that had eaten several tribes north of the Three Rivers, and that this Wendigo would most certainly attack the French fort next. The origin of the Wendigo seems to be pretty similar across the native cultures. A hunter who had suffered through the winter, on the brink of starvation, had resorted to cannibalism. Once he did, he was transformed into a beast, doomed forever to feast upon flesh of humans, never fully satisfied. Different tribes describe the physical appearance of the Wendigo differently.
And in some places, it's a Wendigo, right? And in others, a Wendigo?
Yes, by all of its different names, it basically translates to the evil spirit that devours mankind.
That's lovely.
Isn't it?
Yes.
The Algonquins say that it is a giant with a heart of ice. Sometimes its entire body is made of ice, and it is skeletal and deformed, missing its lips and toes.
Say it's creepy. It's so creepy.
The Ojibwa described the winter cannibalistic monster as being as tall as a tree, also with missing lips, but inside its mouth are jagged teeth. It hisses as it breathes and leaves bloody footprints in the snow. It will eat any man, woman, or child it comes across, but sometimes it will possess a person, turning that person into a Wendigo, forcing it to devour its own loved ones.
Jeez.
Sometimes they are painfully thin, covered in mummy-like gray flesh, but at other times it may be quite large as it expands in size after each meal. Non-native popular culture tends to portray the Wendigo in movies and on TV as having horns or antlers, as well as extra menacing sharp teeth and exceptionally long tongue, but that's not part of the original legends.
Well, sure. The thing wasn't creepy enough for the mainstream, so they had to beef it up somehow.
A Wendigo reeks of death and can move with incredible speeds across water and deep snow. It has excellent eyesight and sense of smell. But in native legends, the true Wendigo is even more terrifying because it resembles an everyday human more than some mythological beast. So, how did the legend of the Wendigo even start? Some historians feel that the Wendigo is really a symbol. Prior to European conquest, a person who was excessively greedy or committed an atrocious act may be exhibiting the true nature of a Wendigo. After the Europeans arrived, it could be that the Wendigo represented the actions of the Europeans themselves. The Wendigo legend may have been a way for native people to explain why horrific things were being done to them in a way that fit their cultural beliefs. But is it really just a legend? In 1661, a Jesuit relations document stated that a group of men across the nations of the North Sea, so Britain, Scotland, Denmark, Norway, that area, seemed afflicted by lunacy, hypochondria, and a frenzy all at once that caused them to experience a canine-like hunger to the point of devouring the flesh of all their other tribespeople. The document claimed that they were like werewolves and had to be killed in order to be saved from their own madness, which sounds an awful lot like the werewolf-like Wendigo of North America.
And the Reavers and Firefly.
In North America, there's several disturbing tales of the Wendigo, spanning the 1800s right up through the 1920s in the records of the Hudson Bay Company. One of the earlier documented cases involved workers and Plains Indians. The Hudson Bay Company workers viewed the Plains Indians with suspicion and very little cultural understanding. When a murder happened, the workers were quick to blame the native people, citing the rituals as evidence of madness. Often, when a murder did occur, falsely accused people were killed as a precaution under the belief that they might become a Wendigo. But the most well-documented case from the 1800s was in 1878. A Plains Cree trapper named Swift Runner lived in Alberta, Canada, with his wife and 6 children. He often traded with the Hudson Bay Company, 25 miles away. The winter of 1878 to 1879 was brutal, and Swift Runner, along with several other Cree families, were on the brink of starvation. Swift Runner's eldest son passed away, and although he could have gone for emergency supplies, he either chose not to or couldn't. He ended up succumbing to cannibalism, and then he killed his remaining family in order to consume them as well. He was charged with murder and executed at Fort Saskatchewan.
Wow.
In 1907, an Oji-Cree chief named Jack Fiddler was well known as a Wendigo hunter, claiming that he had successfully defeated 14 of them. Fiddler's own brother, Peter Flett, was killed by Jack after food ran out during a trading expedition with the Hudson Bay Company, simply because he suspected that Peter might be a Wendigo. Although Jack was arrested for the murder, he died before his sentence could be carried out.
Wow, so he killed his own brother because he thought his own brother was a Wendigo.
Exactly. It was around 1920 that the idea of the Wendigo psychosis first started showing up in medical journals. A missionary named J.E. Sandin had been working with the Cree in the James Bay area when he came across a woman who claimed that a Wendigo was stalking her because it wanted to eat her. So I think that's where the question comes in. Is the whole idea of the Wendigo a form of psychosis? Did a legend or a symbol of European domination turn into such a deep-seated fear that people began to believe in it to the point of committing such disgusting crimes? Almost like a mass psychosis where people just went off the rails, filling their long winters with fear and isolation and distrust. Or did it become such a widespread fear that it created a tulpa?
Oh, that's a good or an interesting idea.
That it is. A tulpa is an entity that literally comes to life because so many people believe in its existence. So could that be what happened? Luckily, the rash of Wendigo-related incidents, the sightings and the accusations, and even the accounts of cannibalism dwindled and disappeared by the mid-1900s. Although, interestingly, there is a Lake Wendigo in Minnesota and a Wendigo Lake in Wisconsin, and a Cave of the Wendigo in Ontario.
All of which are places I probably would not want to visit during the winter. So what do you think? Did the original Wendigo legends and beliefs turn into something more real, or were there really human cryptid creatures out there?
Well, I think that there's always some amount of truth that sparks these legends, but to the severity of how it gets twisted from person to person retelling it, one can't really be sure.
Right, especially when it gets taken away from native cultures and morphed into something else for TV and movies.
Right, and if you believe in tulpas, I could see that as a reason for this all happening.
Right.
Among many other things like the Hat Man and, things like that.
Exactly. Hey, did you know? In 1916, sisters Augusta and Adeline Van Buren, descendants of Martin Van Buren, rode their motorcycles 5,500 miles across the country. They did it in order to show that women could be Army dispatch riders just as well as men, and to show their support for women's suffrage. They were ridiculed by the media for not knowing their place, and they were arrested several times. Why? For wearing pants. Who'da thunk it?
Well, dear, that was pretty interesting. I'm glad that women wear pants these days, especially those yoga pants.
Yeah.
They have to be my favorite.
We know.
So, where did your mind wander this week?
My brain was on the road this week, except, when it wasn't running off the tracks. There's quite the roadside attraction in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. It's perched on top of a metal stand and is about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. At first glance, it looks like a giant acorn, but as you get closer, strange hieroglyphs painted around its bottom ridge are a bit puzzling. It isn't until you read the bright green sign attached to its front, Kecksburg UFO, December 9th, 1965, that it all seems to make more sense. What you're looking at is a prop, left over from an Unsolved Mysteries episode that aired in 1990. Except the prop is a scale reproduction of a very real, very hushed-up UFO incident known as the Space Acorn.
The Space Acorn?
Yes.
Wow, I've never heard of it.
The Kecksburg Space Acorn UFO incident has also been called Pennsylvania's Roswell. And here's why. On December 9th, 1965, thousands of people across 6 states and Ontario, Canada, reported a bright fireball streaking across the sky a little before 5 p.m. The February 1966 issue of Sky and Telescope reported that the fireball was seen over the Detroit-Windsor area at about 4:44 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. In fact, the FAA received 23 reports from aircraft pilots starting at 4:44 p.m. The Sky and Telescope article concluded that, quote, the path of the fireball extended roughly from northwest to southwest and ended in or near the western part of Lake Erie, end quote. In 1967, the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada published an article stating that a seismograph pinpointed the fireball's location over Detroit at 4:43 p.m. and also concluded that it likely crashed on the northwestern shore of Lake Erie. As it passed over, the blazing fireball dropped hot metal debris over Michigan and northern Ohio, causing several grass fires. The Pittsburgh metropolitan area reported sonic booms from the object. A seismograph 25 miles southwest of Detroit recorded shock waves. The fireball seemed to make an almost controlled crash landing in the small town of Kecksburg, about 30 miles southeast of Philly and 139 miles from Lake Erie.
It sounds like it could almost be something military.
Mm-hmm. Curious Kecksburg locals immediately swarmed the crash site area, including reporter John Murphy, claiming they saw a 15-foot-wide bronze-colored aircraft. Shaped like a bell or an acorn, it had no wings and no visible propulsion. But it did have hieroglyphs, similar to Egyptian, engraved all along its bottom ridge. Murphy snapped numerous photos of the craft and recorded interviews with witnesses on the spot.
Well, that's no military aircraft if it's got hieroglyphics on it.
Right. Within hours, the Air Force personnel arrived, though, cordoning off the area and shooing away every last bystander. It was rumored that among the personnel were local police and scientists. Every one of them stated that although they thoroughly searched the area, they found absolutely nothing.
Isn't it that the way it always goes? Nothing to see here.
And yet, inexplicably, a flatbed truck close to the crash site was loaded up, its cargo covered in tarps, and stealthily left the area under a cover of darkness. So they took the nothing that they found.
Right.
And carted it away.
You know, if they wanted to be more open about it and not have all this UFO controversy, wouldn't it be just, the thing to do is just load it up on the flatbed, strap it down so everybody can see it, and just cart it off.
Right.
And then there's no, conspiracy theories.
Right.
Or anything like that.
Not all of the military personnel left with the truck, which is rather odd since, again, they kept saying they didn't find anything. In fact, for days afterwards, local residents who went out to the crash site were turned away, sometimes forcibly. Several residents even experienced uncomfortable visits by men dressed in suits, who completely fit the bill of men in black. The government men warned each family they spoke to not to discuss what they had seen with anyone, even though they offered little to no explanation of what it was the people had seen, since they claimed, still, that there wasn't anything to see at all. John Murphy, the reporter, was busy putting together his story at his radio station, hoping to air a segment on the crash as soon as possible. But the men in black paid him a visit too, at the radio station where he worked, and coworkers have said that they confiscated all of the photos and all of the recordings, and he was told not to air a single thing that he had collected. So, what was this big nothing they were trying to hide? What could the space Acorn possibly be? Well, the first answer, of course, is alien. Pure and simple, it was an alien spacecraft.
That it was. It was an alien spacecraft. A giant acorn, not a cigar-shaped type this time. Or a flying V. It was an acorn.
But what if it wasn't? Well, there are other possible explanations. The first, of course, was that it was simply a meteor, which is what the Pentagon came out and said it was. But every witness who came forward then and in the years since has adamantly denied that that's what it was. I mean, what meteor looks smooth like a bell? And at 15 feet in diameter, it should have caused way more devastation than it did. And witnesses claimed it didn't just crash into the ground. It made what they called a controlled crash, as if it was being piloted in some way.
Right, and if there were truly hieroglyphics on it, it wasn't a meteor.
No. So, what if it was a man-made craft of some kind? There's an explanation for that, too. A Soviet satellite. Speculation arose that perhaps what people had seen was simply the re-entry of Cosmos 96, a craft intended to study Venus. The Cosmos 96 had launched in November of 1965, but due to some technical issues, never made it outside low Earth orbit. Interestingly enough, it did re-enter Earth's atmosphere on December 9th, 1965, the same exact day as the space Acorn. However, scientists have concluded that the incline of the space Acorn fireball was too steep to be the Cosmos 96. Furthermore, scientists estimate that Cosmos 96 reentry was way earlier in the day than 5 p.m.
Well, that's interesting that it did happen the same day, though.
Right, so as usual, I looked at pictures online, at least at the few that I could find of the Cosmos 96. And to be fair, there were not many of them at all. But I could kind of see how sections of that craft, after burning up in the atmosphere, could have resembled the acorn or the bell shape that the witnesses described. The photos make the cosmos appear silver in color, and I have no clue what the atmosphere does to metals, if it would turn it to more of a bronze. The only thing the Cosmos 96 appears to not have is any kind of engravings at all along the outside that could somehow be mistaken for Egyptian hieroglyphics. But it might explain why our military took over the crash site, but not why they claimed they didn't find anything, because at that point in 1965, we were still in a race with Russia when it came to space exploration. So you think our government would be willing to announce that a Soviet satellite had failed.
Yeah, you think they'd put that out there.
They'd be, happy about that, I would think.
Right, and more likely reverse engineering it.
There's an even more unlikely man-made explanation, the bell. Now, I know it might seem like we talk about the Nazis quite a bit on our show, and it does seem like they figure into a lot of paranormal and supernatural happenings in many events that took place in the latter half of the 20th century. But I just want to say we're not intentionally bringing them up so often. It just seems to go hand in hand that when strange things happen in the paranormal realm during this period, the Nazis seem to somehow be involved.
That they do.
And the Kecksburg space acorn is no exception, because, as I said, there's been some speculation that the space acorn was actually the bell. So the bell was a supposedly top-secret Nazi experiment in Poland during World War II. And unfortunately, no one knows what the bell could actually do, or if it even really existed. But supposedly, it was some sort of anti-gravity machine, or it was a time machine, or it was a weapon of mass destruction. According to some sources, the bell was about 12 feet high and 9 feet in diameter, with, quote, 2 high-speed counter-rotating cylinders filled with a purplish metallic-looking liquid that was supposedly highly radioactive, end quote. In a nutshell, the bell was allegedly shaped an awful lot like the space acorn. But then, where were the hazmat suits on the government personnel? Where was the radiation at the crash site, if it was the bell? And since there are no photographs of the bell that I could find, it would be pretty hard to compare it to the unsolved mysteries replica of the space acorn in Kecksburg. I mean, I'm sure I could read a lot of literature about the bell and compare it that way, but I'm pretty sure that that's not what crash landed in Kecksburg. So we're still left asking, what was it? In 2002, investigative journalist Leslie Keene, who just happens to be one of the 3 journalists who discovered the existence of ATIP back in 2017, tried to find out for the Sci-Fi Channel. She put in a FOIA request about the Kecksburg incident. NASA promised an expedited search and then came up with nothing. Well, they had stuff, but refused to release it. Refusing to be deterred, Keene filed a lawsuit, which was settled in 2007. She literally sued NASA and won.
Good for her.
But it took another 2 years for NASA to release any files, at least the ones they were willing to share, because some of the files were deemed missing or otherwise destroyed.
And I imagine what she did get was heavily redacted, so
Yes.
there probably wasn't much to read throughout these documents.
But she did find some interesting stuff in the documents she did receive, like Project Moondust, which was the code name given to the U.S. government's inquiry into non-U.S. space objects. But what was even more interesting was that NASA concluded that the space Acorn was not the Cosmos 96, or any other country's spacecraft, for that matter.
Really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
So what was it, according to NASA? It's not clear. So here we are, almost 60 years later, no closer to the truth. But Kecksburg will welcome you with open arms. In fact, they celebrate the anniversary of the Space Acorn's crash with an annual UFO festival, complete with vendors and speakers. And you might even pass a witness or two on the sidewalk.
You know, out of all the shows out of the last 20 years that I've watched, I do not remember anything on the Space Acorn.
Which is interesting since they say it's Pennsylvania's Roswell, but it's not one that we hear about anywhere near as often as Roswell.
No, I wonder why that is. I haven't heard it discussed on Ancient Aliens or any of the shows or any of the podcasts that I've listened to.
I know, it's pretty cool.
That is. Nice find.
Thank you.
Well, I guess it about wraps it up for this episode.
I guess so. So we'll see all you wanderers next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
Thank you all for your continued support.
See you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.